I've been driving for Lyft for a few years now, mostly working late night shifts. The roads are quieter and the tips are better, but every once in a while, you get a story that sticks with you for all the wrong reasons. I've always considered myself a cautious driver. I've had my fair share of odd passengers, but nothing, and I mean nothing, compares to what happened that night. It was the reason I installed a dash cam. It started off like any other shift. Just me, my car, and the occasional odd noise from my old but reliable 2005 Volvo. The streets were completely deserted, just how I liked it. Around 2 a.m., I got a ride request from a nearby convenience store. Seemed normal enough. But the moment the request came in, I got this strange feeling in my gut. You ever get that unexplainable sense that something's just off? That was exactly what hit me. As I pulled up, I immediately understood why. The convenience store was closed, all the lights were off, and the parking lot was completely empty. And then I saw him. He was pacing outside, wearing a tattered hoodie with a hole in the sleeve. His movements were erratic, like he couldn't stand still. Every few seconds, he'd glance over his shoulder as if someone or something was after him. I hesitated. My thumb hovered over the cancel ride button. But for some reason, I didn't press it. Instead, I unlocked the doors. He slid into the back seat without a word. From the moment I took my foot off the brake, I regretted it. Most passengers either scroll on their phones or stare out the window. Not him. He just sat there, staring at me through the rearview mirror, unblinking, unmoving, just watching. I turned on the radio, hoping to break the suffocating silence. But the second the music started, his voice cut through the air like a knife. "Turn it off." It wasn't a request. His voice was deep, raspy, like a lifelong smoker. My hands tightened on the wheel as I switched it off. We drove in silence for a while, and for a moment I thought that would be the worst of it. But then he spoke. "Ever pick up someone you shouldn't have?" The question hit me like a brick. I let out a nervous chuckle. "Well, I hope not." He didn't laugh. He leaned back and muttered something under his breath. Then, out of nowhere, he started rambling about how he used to drive for Uber, until some punks stole from him. His words were slurred, but I caught the gist of his story. And the entire time he spoke, he was smiling. Not a normal smile, a wide, unsettling grin, like he was reminiscing about something he enjoyed. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. "It's funny how much trust you put in someone sitting right behind you." I gripped the wheel tighter, suddenly hyper-aware of how vulnerable I was. The tension in the car was suffocating. He kept muttering, apologizing to someone who wasn't there. "I didn't mean it," he whispered over and over. We were only a few minutes from his stop when he suddenly snapped out of his trance. "You missed the turn." I hadn't. The GPS showed we were on track, but his voice was sharp, angry. I slammed on the brakes out of pure instinct. "Pull over." I didn't argue. My hands were shaking as I put the car in park. Then headlights flooded the rearview mirror. A police car. Relief washed over me, until I noticed him slouching down, trying to stay out of sight. I turned my head slightly and saw him lying flat across the back seat, eyes squeezed shut, like he was pretending to be dead. I looked away before he caught me watching. For what felt like an eternity, he stayed like that, completely still. Then, without warning, he sat up, opened the door, and whispered, "You got lucky." And just like that, he was gone. I cut my shift short after that. A few weeks later, I came across a news article on my phone. A convenience store had been robbed that same night, 2 blocks from where I picked him up. My stomach twisted. I had been inches away from a criminal, a man who had likely just committed a violent crime. And if he had wanted to, he could have done anything to me. I thought about reporting it, but I have my reasons for avoiding the police. And at this point, I doubt it would help. All I know is that I'm much more careful about who I let into my car now. After that, I decided to leave the city behind. I had always pictured myself living an urban lifestyle, but after a traumatic experience I won't get into, I couldn't handle noise anymore. Every honk, Every slammed door felt like a gunshot to my nerves. My psychiatrist told me I had developed phonophobia. I needed quiet. 3 years ago, I found a cabin buried deep in the Pacific Northwest. I won't say exactly where, for reasons you'll soon understand. A few months ago, I had an experience that still lingers in my mind. I've been driving for Lyft for a few years now, usually working late night shifts. The roads are quieter and the tips are better, but every once in a while, you get a story that sticks with you, and not in a good way. I've always considered myself a careful driver. I've dealt with my fair share of odd passengers, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened that night. It was unsettling enough that it made me install a dash cam the very next day. The shift started like any other. Just me, my beat-up 2005 Volvo, and the occasional odd sound from the engine. The streets were practically deserted, which is exactly how I liked it. Then, sometime after 2 a.m., I got a request from a nearby convenience store. At first, it seemed harmless, but I had this gut feeling, like something was off, though I couldn't explain why, and as I pulled up, I figured it out. The convenience store was closed, the lights were off, and not a single car was in the lot. Then, I saw him. He was pacing outside, wearing a filthy, tattered hoodie that looked like it hadn't been washed in years. There was even a hole in the sleeve. His movements were jerky, like he couldn't stand still, and he kept glancing over his shoulder as if someone was following him. If I had to guess, he was on something. I should have canceled the ride. My finger even hovered over the cancel button for a second, but for some reason, I didn't. I unlocked the doors, and he slid into the back seat without a word. The regret hit me the moment I took my foot off the brake. Most passengers either scroll through their phones or stare out the window, but not him. He just sat there, staring at me through the rearview mirror, not blinking, not looking away, just an unbroken stare that made my skin crawl. I tried to ignore him, but every so often I'd accidentally meet his gaze in the mirror. He looked angry. I turned on the radio to break the tension, but the second the music started, he snapped at me to turn it off. His voice was deep and raspy, the voice of a heavy smoker. It caught me off guard, and my hands tightened on the wheel. I resisted the urge to look at him, and just did as he said. Silence filled the car. For a few minutes, I thought maybe he'd just sit there quietly until we reached his destination. That's what I hoped for, at least. But then he spoke. I remember the conversation like it was yesterday. Ever pick up someone you shouldn't have? That question hit me like a brick. I let out an awkward laugh and said, well, I hope not. I was trying to keep it light, but he didn't react. Instead, he leaned back and muttered something under his breath, something I couldn't quite make out. Then he started rambling. He told me he used to drive for Uber but quit after some punks stole from his car. His words were slurred, making some parts hard to understand, but I got the general idea. As he spoke, I glanced in the mirror and realized something unsettling. He was smiling. The whole time. A normal person wouldn't smile while telling a story like that. Then he said something that sent a chill down my spine. It's funny how much trust you put in someone sitting right behind you. That was the moment I stopped thinking of him as just another weird passenger. Now he was a threat. I kept my eyes on the road, but my heart was racing. My fingers clenched the wheel tighter, my mind spinning through worst-case scenarios. I stole a glance at the GPS, focusing on the destination like it was my only lifeline, but he wasn't done talking. He kept babbling. Some of it was nonsense, but some of it was concerning. And then, out of nowhere, he started apologizing. Not to me. At first, I thought he was talking to himself, but then he said something that made my blood turn to ice. He started insinuating that he had just done something bad. He kept whispering, I didn't mean it, over and over, followed by frantic mutterings of, I'm sorry. I didn't respond. I didn't even look at him. I didn't know what he had done. I didn't want to find out, and the destination was still too far away. But it was somewhere in Oregon. It was perfect. Few neighbors, no traffic, barely any cell service. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. Then I met Michelle. She showed up at my door a week after I moved in, holding a basket of preserves like she had stepped out of a Hallmark movie. She was in her late 60s, with oddly long gray hair and piercing blue eyes. She wasn't exactly unfriendly, but something about her felt off. She handed me the basket without a word, then finally spoke. Always keep your lanterns full, your windows shut tight, and your wits sharper than your axe. It sounded less like advice and more like a warning. That night, a thunderstorm rolled in. A few hours later, loud banging rattled my front door. I looked outside. Michelle. She was soaked to the bone, clutching a flashlight. "I saw someone near your woodpile," she blurted out. I grabbed my own flashlight and stepped onto the porch, scanning the trees. Nothing. "Are you sure?" I asked. She nodded, glancing anxiously at the woods. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away. As I shut the door, realization sank in. Her house was 10 minutes away. How could she have seen someone near my woodpile from there? That night I woke up to the sound of a snapping branch. I crept to the window. And there she was, standing at the edge of the woods, watching. I ducked down before she could see me. The next night, someone else knocked on my door. Not Michelle, a burly, bearded man. I locked myself in the bathroom and called the police. Minutes later, I heard my front door cave in, shattering glass, splintering wood. I held my breath, waiting for footsteps. None came. By the time the cops arrived, the intruder was gone. I begged them to check Michelle's cabin. When we got there, my blood ran cold. It was abandoned. Had been for decades. The police refused to investigate further. They told me living in the woods was a risk I had chosen to take. I moved out soon after. To this day, I don't know who or what Michelle was. I just know that I was being watched, and I still don't know why. Succored the call in the night. My name is Luke, and my girlfriend, Catherine, and I have been together for 3 years. We met as freshmen at Stanford, my dream school since I was 8. Neither of us are from California, though. We both grew up in Ohio. She's from Cincinnati, and I'm from just outside Columbus. Maybe that's why we clicked so quickly. At a school where most students are from the West Coast, being from the Midwest made us stand out to each other. One of our traditions as a couple is how we split Christmas between our families. Catherine has become a beloved presence among my relatives, to the point where her coming over is practically expected. Since her house is only a 2-hour drive from mine, we worked out a system early on: Christmas Eve with my family, who celebrate the night before, then a late-night drive to her house to spend Christmas Day with hers. Until I met her, I didn't realize most families celebrate on the 25th, not the night before. Oddly enough, my favorite part of the holiday isn't Christmas Eve or Christmas Day. It's that late-night drive. Over time, it's become its own tradition, something we both look forward to every year. The first time we did it is still one of my favorite memories with her. The route from my house to hers avoids major highways, taking us through quiet back roads lined with fields, trees, and the occasional distant farmhouse. It's always so late at night that we hardly ever see another car, making it feel like we have the whole world to ourselves. And don't laugh, but every year we blast Juice WRLD the entire way. His music has been a shared obsession of ours since we met. I know some people find it cringy, but there's something about singing along together that makes the drive feel special, like we're completely in sync. This past Christmas Eve started like any other. After a warm, festive night with my family, we packed up my car around midnight and hit the road. Snow was falling lightly, and the roads were deserted, just as we expected. With the heat cranked up and the music playing, everything felt perfect. Then, in an instant, that feeling disappeared. I was driving when our music was suddenly interrupted by my phone ringing. Annoyed, I glanced down. It was an unknown number, probably a scam call. I ignored it without a second thought. Catherine laughed. "Damn, these scammers are dedicated, calling people on Christmas?" I chuckled and nodded, thinking nothing of it. But a few minutes later, my phone rang again. Another unknown number, probably the same one. I sighed and let it go to voicemail. Catherine glanced at me, raising an eyebrow. That's weird. I tilted my phone toward her. Unknown number, I said, shrugging. The music resumed, and I tried to shake it off. But not even 2 minutes later, the phone rang again. This time, I snapped. Cursing under my breath, I fumbled for my phone, swiping the screen aggressively as I answered, ready to tell whoever it was to screw off. Hello? I barked. Silence. I turned down the music, listening intently. A faint static crackled on the other end. Just as I was about to hang up, a man's voice spoke. Hello, Luke! My stomach dropped. I nearly swerved off the road. My breath caught in my throat. Before I could say anything, he started speaking again, reciting personal details about me, my full name, my address, facts about my life that no stranger should know, that no stranger could know. My hands were clammy against the steering wheel. My heart pounded. Who the hell was this? I wanted to pull over, but I kept driving, locked in some kind of trance. My mind raced to make sense of it. I considered yelling, demanding answers, but my gut told me that anger wouldn't help. When he finally paused, I forced my voice to stay steady as I asked, What do you want? A beat of silence. Then, in a calm, measured tone, he said something that made my blood run cold. I'm not here for you, Luke. I'm here for Catherine. My grip on the wheel tightened. The air in the car felt suffocating. I turned to look at Catherine. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with terror. Hearing my own name was one thing. Hearing hers was 100 times worse. I forced out a lie. I don't know a Catherine. You have the wrong number, the man chuckled. She's sitting right next to you. That was it. I couldn't keep driving. My hands were shaking so badly I had no choice but to pull over to the side of the road. I opened my mouth, ready to demand answers, but before I could say anything, Catherine lunged forward and hung up the call. Just like that, I turned on her, practically screaming. What the hell are you doing? Her hands were trembling. I panicked, she stammered. I stared at her, stunned. He was threatening us, and you just hung up? She didn't answer. She just looked at me with terrified eyes. I tried calling the number back. Once, twice, three. I tried calling the number back. Once, twice, 3 times, but the call never went through. Catherine exhaled shakily. Luke, just drive. I hesitated, then finally pulled back onto the road, my mind spinning. The rest of the drive was silent. I didn't turn the music back on. Neither of us spoke. I kept thinking, who was that? How did they know so much about me? About her? Only our families knew we'd be driving that night, and I was certain none of them would pull something like this. So who else could have known? Even when we finally pulled into Catherine's driveway, I didn't feel safe. It's been almost a month now, and I still don't have answers. Neither of our families were behind it, we asked. Catherine swears she's just as clueless as I am, which means whoever called had sinister intentions. You might think I'm overreacting to a prank call, but listen. No one outside our families knew we'd be on that road at that exact time, and I can't shake the feeling that this isn't over. Every time my phone rings, my stomach clenches. I brace myself. I know he's going to call again. It's just a matter of time.